All right, welcome back to part two of the side table build. This is the one from 731 Woodworks with no drawer. And here's how we're going so far. There's the basic structure. And then I glued up a couple of tops, and that was just joining three boards together on their edge joints, and that'll be for the tabletop and for the bottom shelf down here. So we'll get right to it. All right, the next thing is I didn't get the ends of these boards exactly square. I kind of slid them forward and back a little bit and twisted them just a hair to get the glue lines to line. And this is the bottom side here, so I haven't cleaned off all the glue yet. But to get these ends squared up, it's a little wide, because it's a little over 18 inches, it's like 18 and a half inches wide, to fit on my table saw and do a cross cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my old circular saw. And then the best way to do that, this is real awkward for me because all circular saws seem to be made for right-handed people, and as a lefty, it just doesn't quite work. But what I've done here is I set up a square, and I just clamped the square to the tabletop, offset by the distance, between my blade and the edge guide here. And so I'm just going to take about not even a blade width off here. And then you set the depth so that the blade's coming just out the bottom. And it actually has a little gauge right here. And if you can see this little white arrow pointing at, 1 by, which is nominally about 3/4 of an inch thick. But I just clamped the square to use as my guide, and I'll make that cut now. Like I said, I'm not too good with the circular saw, again, because I feel like I'm always trying to do stuff with my right hand that I'd be more comfortable with my left. But that has always put me like right in line with the blade and such. So I actually practiced this cut a few times just with the blade on the edge, vice going through the wood. You got to make sure the clamps aren't going to hit the motor and that you can get all the way through the cut, before I hit this front clamp. So this is about the max length that you can do just with the setup I have right here. So I'll let the guard go back. I'll bump it right up against my square. Check one last time to make sure the work is square in there. Yeah, it's right on there. Careful not to put your finger on the trigger until you're actually ready to make your cut. And that the cord's going to be out of the way so it's not going to get caught up on the wood, or you're not going to step on it and yank the saw off, because since it's not anchored to a table, this thing can be pretty dangerous, especially if that guard is missing for any reason. So, all right, wish me luck. Here we go. All right, and not the best cut. You can see it burned a little bit in here. And then it was hard to keep the back up against the edge at the end. So my last inch here or so, I'll have to sand that flat as part of my overall sanding. So I'll do the other side, make sure it's all squared up, and then we'll try putting it on the table. All right, I've got the same setup for the second edge on with the square to line the guard up with. And we'll go ahead and plug the saw in and make that cut next. And that cut went quite a bit better. One other thing with the end gray, now my joinery definitely wasn't the gray. You can see how warped out this thing is, but is you're supposed to make the arches of each piece of wood go opposite. That's supposed to help keep it from making one big bow. In my case, it looks like a worm because I didn't do that great on the joinery, but when you guys are doing this, make sure, you know, so this one's like rainbow, smiley face, rainbow, or frown, happy frown, but that's the way it's supposed to be joined up there. All right, minus some sanding, that's what our top is gonna look like on there. And then I'll show you how to fasten that in just a little bit. Next up will be to get that shelf in the bottom. That one will be a little tougher because, you know, I gotta measure it out. It should be, I think it was 11 and a half or 11 inches wide down there, but I'll measure it out and then I'll narrow down that bottom shelf to fit inside there. Okay, I need to cut this shelf down to about 11 and a half inches. So I'm just gonna take a bit off of each side to get it down to the 11 and a half inches. So again, it's funny that would be about the maximum width I can fit on my little table saw. So again, we're going back to the circular saw with the same setup, this time to narrow it down. All right, so I think what we had here is, you can see, you know, we were burning through that knot. That was our initial problem. And then since this board is so wide, with me putting all that pressure on it, it was actually not tipping, but bending a little bit. So it didn't quite catch the bottom here. So I probably should have dropped my blade a little bit lower. Probably would have made the difference, but and then supported my work better with these circular saws. Supporting your wood is one of the, I don't know, one of the most important things, so that you don't get blade binding and kickback and all sorts of terrible stuff that can happen with that. Also would help to have a new blade on it. I believe that blade is as old as the saw. So what happened is we have a little bit of a, I don't know if you can make it out in this light, but right here, that was on the bottom and that just broke off. And then here's our waste piece, and you can see where that kind of broke off. Okay, back to the table saw. So again, my piece is just a little too wide to fit my fence on. Really anything over about 10 and a half, 11 inches. There's just not enough clamping area for that fence on here. So what I've done is I clamped a straight cherry board exactly parallel to my blade, as far over as I need to just trim the very edge of this. So we'll hold it through, run it through like this, just using this clamped board as our fence instead of the fence, and we'll see how that works. All right, blade height is set. I know my fence is parallel to the blade, and so I'll just run it straight through and hopefully knock off, you know, this corner edge that got hurt by the circular saw. And I cleaned up that edge, you know, there's that knot. I cleaned that up really nice. So now we'll go to the other side, since now we're not really all that even between the three boards here. That one's a little narrow, because we'll take the rest off of this to get it right down to our 11 and a half inches. All right, so here's our same clamped on board to use as our fence, and it's 11.5 inches to the kerf leaving and 11.5 inches to the edge of the blade on the way in. So it's parallel to the blade, it's the right distance away, clamp down, so all we got to do is run our piece through it. All right, the test fit for that one, it fit perfectly. So when I tried to put it in, it rubbed on both sides, and then I realized that, you know, this wood can expand and contract, you know, in width, especially this probably green undried wood here. So as the temperature changes, it can expand and contract. So I don't want it braced perfectly against the two sides there, because I don't want it to break away my joints as the wood expands. So I'm just going to take half of a blade kerf, so it's that about a 1/16 of an inch off, just to narrow it down a hair and have it fit in there with a little bit of wiggle room so it can expand just slightly. All right, we have the basic table put together. So next up will be a couple hours of sanding and then finishing. And I might save that for the next video. But here we go. So there's with the shelf and the tabletop, not attached yet, just set on there. I'll attach them so that they have room to, you know, expand and contract a little bit. But pretty much now, most of the work is going to be in sanding, you know, all the glue and making sure all the joints are flat and straight. And then doing a little bit of edge work so you don't have all these sharp edges. And I haven't decided whether I'm going to run that through the router, you know, to round over the edges of at least the tabletop and shelf, or whether to just sand the edges a little bit. So we'll decide that here in the next couple days and figure out exactly, you know, what we're gonna do there. I think the router is gonna be tough on this wood, because I think it's just, when you get to the ends, it's just gonna splinter out a bunch. But I'll do a little YouTube research and see the best way to keep that from happening. And then maybe I'll just round over the top edge, at least, of that table. But anyway, there it is. Next up will be a whole lot of sanding and finishing.